Hello and welcome to another TLDR US video, the second in our series evaluating the first term of President Donald J. Trump, and whether the president stuck to his 2016 promises. This video will take a look at one of his key catchphrases of the 2016 campaign, "Drain the swamp." As with the other videos in this series, we'll take a look at the initial promise, whether it's been successfully delivered, the potential defence for why it perhaps hasn't come to fruition, any comments on what Trump plans to do on this in his second term, and finally, what Joe Biden and the Democrats' stance is on the issue. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to be notified when we post. Also, if you want to support the channel, please consider signing up to our Patreon. We've just announced a whole new bunch of perks, including early access to videos, behind the scenes posts, seeing your name and likeness in videos, as well as new live events. There's a link to the Patreon down below. Drain the swamp was a term popularised by Ronald Reagan in his first political campaigns, making it the second campaign slogan that Trump took from Reagan. Anyway, Reagan saw it as taking on the Washington establishment. Trump similarly saw the issue as getting rid of lobbyists, special interests and corruption, all things synonymous with Washington DC and its furniture, ultimately helping him to become an anti-establishment candidate. Specifically though, Trump called for three main things: changing the definition of a lobbyist, making it harder to become one after leaving the government, and fixed congressional terms. Regardless of exact policies though, the idea of draining the swamp became a key part of his campaign, and it was regularly chanted by his supporters at rallies and other events.
And you're right about the swamp. Say it again. Right? You better believe it. Boy, that is... That is a... You know, I said that about a week ago. And I didn't like it that much. Didn't sound that great. And the whole world picked it up. So it shows you what I know. It's crazy. Drain the swamp. We're going to drain the swamp of Washington. We're going to have fun doing it. We're all doing it together.
In terms of his success in this area, it's been mixed. If you think of the swamp as established Washington elite, those politicians who've been around in Congress and in government for years, then Trump's first cabinet was a huge shock to the system, and definitely a changing of the guard. It was described by NPR as a combination of millionaires, billionaires, outsiders, and even a few politicians who opposed the work of the very agencies they've been tapped to lead. This may not be phrased in the most positive way, but for Trump and his supporters, this is exactly what they were looking for. The quote refers to figures such as Rex Tillerson, Trump's first Secretary of State and former head of ExxonMobil, and a man with no former political experience, or Scott Pruitt, the climate change skeptic who was put in charge of the Environmental Protection Agency, or even Rick Perry, who was put in charge of energy despite running for the 2012 GOP nomination on the platform of abolishing the department, before later admitting that he didn't actually know what the job entailed. Regardless, to Trump supporters this represented a success, new people taking the helm. They might be inexperienced billionaires, but at least they were new. Trump has also been successful in draining the swamp of anyone who opposes him. Following his impeachment trial, Trump sacked Lieutenant Colonel Vindman and Gordon Sondland, whose testimonies were among the most problematic for Trump and his defense. He was heavily criticised for this move, but he clearly didn't want anyone who wasn't fully loyal to him to be part of his administration. Also, in terms of the specific goals we mentioned earlier, Trump did implement an executive order which banned government employees from leaving their job to go and lobby the exact department where they came from. But as we know, executive orders aren't exactly the most effective tool in the box. It's actually been found by Joshua Kennedy of Georgia Southern University that only 2.5% of executive orders are actually carried out, and it doesn't seem like this one worked brilliantly either. According to the Associated Press, there are around half a dozen of Trump's own former staffers who are already breaking the order. It wasn't just staffers who are leaving the White House to become lobbyists. Oh no, the revolving door is well and truly revolving. As of February this year, over 300 lobbyists are working for Trump, some of whom are actually in charge of departments. Scott Pruitt's replacement at the Environmental Protection Agency, Andrew Wheeler, was literally a coal lobbyist before getting the job. And it's not like Trump has prevented his administration from becoming lobbied either. Lobbying spending in 2019 was at the highest it's been since Obama's second year in office. This is crazy for the guy who was supposedly set to save Washington from lobbying in 2016. In fairness to Trump, although this is all true, Jeff Hosier, head of a lobbying analysis project, makes the point that in his office, his conception of the swamp seems to have adapted into simply the establishment. If you look at it that way, as we've discussed, you can easily see that Trump's done a great job of draining the swamp. If replacing establishment politicians with his own offspring is a great thing or not, is probably a decision for you to make. On that point though, maybe Trump is creating his own swamp. Nepotism? Surely having your own daughter and son-in-law in key advisory roles doesn't exactly scream A+ on the whole idea of clearing out special interests and so on. And then there's the real issue of corruption. Trump was impeached by the House of Representatives for allegedly trying to force the Ukrainian president, and fellow former TV star might I add, into investigating Hunter and Joe Biden in order to harm his opponent's chances at election. This isn't exactly the best look for someone who's trying to fight the corrupt. You can make your own mind up as to how successful he's been at draining the swamp. But in Trump's defense, it's actually quite hard to get rid of all of the special interests, lobbying and establishment when you literally are now the establishment. If he's still committed despite this, it's also, as Trump's pointed out himself, very hard to immediately get rid of lobbyists and slow the revolving door, as lobbying is so entrenched in Washington that it will take a long time to set up a system in which it's not. Besides all that, in his pre-political life, Trump was not exactly a marginalised actor, so it's quite hard for him to adopt the mindset of an outsider and not mingle with those that he's known for decades. In terms of 2020, unlike the wall, draining the swamp did make it into Trump's second-term agenda. It outlines 4 things. Firstly, passing congressional term limits. Secondly, ending the bureaucratic government bullying of US citizens and small businesses. 3. Exposing Washington's money trail and delegating power back to people and the states. And 4. Draining the globalist swamp by taking on international organisations that hurt American citizens. Going off this, it's clearly still a priority. However, the success will be interesting to see, as like most campaign promises, these are relatively vague. The alternative to Trump, Joe Biden, is probably the epitome of what's been normally known as the swamp. He's been in elected office since 1970, a senator for 36 years and a VP for 8. Like Clinton before him, and maybe even more so, Trump will have a lot of ammunition with which to attack Biden on this front. But he should be careful. Now that he's been in power for 4 years, it's less legitimate for him to use this angle of attack so extremely. And many, like USA Today, feel that Trump has become the swampiest of swamp creatures. However, only time will tell. What do you think? Let us know your comments on how you think Trump has done in this area, and whether or not he's become a swamp creature himself, as well as if you think this will be a fruitful campaigning tool for the Trump campaign in the weeks ahead. Also, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to be notified when we release further videos in this series. Special thanks to our Patreon backers who make videos like this one possible. And if you want to see your name listed at the end of the videos, then be sure to back us on Patreon. There's a link to that in the description.